I'm Sam Short from Short Marine, and I'm sitting down here today with Eric Sorensen. We've done videos previously on hull design and what to look for in a good hull design, but something we haven't really spoken about before is why it's important to have a boat that runs well. The sole reason we make these videos, as you know, is we feel that there is a lack of information out there, and it's a question that we get asked a lot. So we were at dinner last night, Eric, and we were actually speaking about this, and as we always do, and we ended up boiling it down to 5 key reasons why it's important to have a good running hull.
Right.
So it'd be good to have you speak through each point. Starting with number 1, which is around usage.
If you just use your boat around the harbor in a very calm water in a canal, then the design of the boat really doesn't matter, the design of the hull. You know, any boat can go down through flat, calm water, but most of us have greater aspirations than that. We want to be able to go out in the ocean, for example, and the ocean is very, very rarely calm. It usually is at least a meter sea, a swell and a chop, and sometimes it can be much greater than that. You want to be able to use your boat whenever you have the time to use it. You know, we all have a limited amount of time. This is recreational. You might have a certain week you can use your boat, or a certain day, or a certain time of the year. And when you have the time available, you want to be able to get out on the boat. So if the wind's blowing, you don't want to have to say, oh, the wind's blowing today, and this is one day that I had set aside for the last 2 weeks. I can't go out now because my boat isn't suitable for it. So being able to go when you want, go where you want, and go the distance and speed you want is all very important.
And the second key point is around far and fast. So how far you can go and how fast you can get there.
Exactly, and that's very important to pick a boat that can get you there at a good pace. You have some hulls that can run really well in rough water. Most cannot, though. So it gives you a real advantage to have a boat that can take you to a more distant destination, whether it's a fishing ground 80 miles out instead of 40 miles out, or maybe there's an island you want to visit, or maybe you want to go down the coast to another port. A boat that runs well allows you to expand your horizons in terms of distance, how far you can go in a given amount of time. So really expanding your horizons is the key thought here.
And how does it determine how fast you can go?
Well, because a good running boat allows you to go faster when the waves are at a certain height, for example, or a given sea state. So one boat you might have to run along at 12 or 13 knots because it's got a big fat hull. Another boat might allow you to go 20 or 25 knots in the same conditions and do it comfortably. You get a lot more value out of a boat you can use to your own satisfaction.
And what about in certain conditions when you need to get, you know, if you're out offshore and the weather turns, as we all know it can?
Oh, absolutely. You know, Sam, we both had people tell us, well, I don't plan to use my boat when it's rough anyway. Well, it might not be rough when you go out there, but it might be rough when you're trying to come home or when you're halfway to your destination. So the idea that you really don't need a boat that runs well is probably needs to be rethought.
And the fact that you can get in a lot quicker than most boats,
yeah,
if you've got a good running hull.
Absolutely. You could be out there coming back from the, say, fishing ground 60 or 80 miles out, and if you're able to do 20 or 22 knots and everybody else has to slow to crawl, then you'll be back at the dock, you know, and home watching the game before everybody else gets back. And you know, so it adds a lot of value to your boating experience.
And that's even though a specific boat, you know, might be able to do 60 knots, or some boats even be able to do 70 knots in terms of the boat's capable of doing that speed. But you talk a lot about it might be able to do that speed, you know, in flat waters and on a calm day.
Right.
But unfortunately, that's just not the reality, particularly for most boats that are being used offshore.
That's absolutely right. You know, there's a lot of boats that will go fast when the conditions are ideal. But once the wind kicks up and the seas kick up, that's where the rubber meets the road. That's really what's really important. What we would say are real world capabilities. How fast can that boat go safely and comfortably in these 1 or 2 meter seas, whatever it is you're working in. Another thing to think about is range. If you have a boat that doesn't run well, often that's because it has a fat bow. We've talked about that before. And such a boat will dramatically lose range. Every time it hits a wave, it'll slow down a lot more than a boat that is a better running hull. So even your range is affected by the hull design in real world conditions.
The third point that we had was around comfort.
If you're going to be in a boat that runs well, part of the definition of a boat that runs well is how smoothly it hits the seas, whether it pounds or whether it has a smooth ride. And you know, it's called a pleasure boat for a reason. You don't want to get beat up. You want to be treated gently. You want the boat to run gently in a seaway, and you want it to run gently at a higher speed. and your passengers are going to want to go back out with you again, whoever they're, your family or your friends, and they're not going to want to go back out with you again if they're not comfortable. Why would they?
I've told you this story before, but how even my partner, she didn't grow up in and around boats in the way that we did. And so previously, when we'd go out in boats and the boat would be a boat that wouldn't run well and the boat would, pound and slam, she generally felt unsafe, and I couldn't really get her to come out on the boat with me. But then when we started to, we partnered with Grady White, and we, took out a boat like that actually did run well. She felt safe on board, and now she'll generally ask before, if we say we're going out on the boat today, before we head down, she'll be asked, well, are we going on a Grady, or what boat are we going on? And it's because it's that sense of feeling. So we see it a lot. It's important to have particularly the wife and partner and kids feel safe when they're out on the boat, and having a good running hull and one that's comfortable is just absolutely critical for that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and their perception is your reality too. They might actually be safe, but if they don't feel safe, then it's just as good as not being safe. And usually there's a correspondence or a correlation between comfort and safety, because if you are comfortable, then the motions aren't going to be such that somebody's going to tend to get injured, because of violent motions on the boat. And that is very important, that people feel safe and that they actually are safe, of course.
That actually takes us to point 4, which is around safety.
Well, that's another good point. If you have a boat that isn't comfortable, it's usually because the motions are too violent, that there's too much impact when you hit a wave. We call that pounding, or it snap rolls, or it handles poorly because of a poor hull design. So if a boat is predictable when it goes into a turn, if it turns at the right angle, if everything stays stable dynamically and it has comfortable motions, then it's going to be a safe boat as far as the people inside it are concerned.
So what are some other safety considerations?
Well, in addition to the ride of the boat, how the hull responds to the waves is very important. For example, if you're in a high-speed turn, does the boat heel or lean into the turn just at the right amount, so that it's like riding a bicycle or riding in an airplane where you don't know if you're going to the side or you're going straight or not. You want the centrifugal force to go right down through your feet, and you get that through the heel, the lean of the boat, right in the right amount for the change of your heading and the speed of the boat. And the other thing is, in a violent turn or a dramatic turn, hard rudder at high speed, a lot of boats will what we call hook. The stern will spin out right from underneath them. You probably see jet boats that do that for fun. That's not fun on a planing boat. You want the boat, even at a high speed, full turn with the rudder hard over, you want it to turn predictably, just slow down and turn harder. Some boats will just all of a sudden do something unexpected. They're not dynamically predictable. You want the most predictable boat on the planet to go out in, so you know exactly what it's going to do in any given situation.
And what are some other, key elements of a hull design that are crucial in relation to its safety? Particularly for boats that are out in following seas.
The boat is most unpredictable, or least predictable, when it's running with the waves, and that's just because of the balance of the boat as it rides over the crest and down into the trough of a wave. There are periods at which it becomes less stable when it's being supported, say, in the middle of the boat. And you want a boat that tends to go straight no matter what the sea conditions are. If it doesn't, then it can all of a sudden yaw, which means it turns suddenly and violently and heel into the turn, which is the last thing you want. You don't want to throw people around. So make sure that when you're going to quartering sea, especially with the waves abaft the beam on either side, that it does tend to maintain a course, the course that you want it to, and just come a few degrees on either side naturally. Ultimately, the worst thing you can get into is a broach, which means you change course and you roll at the same time. So it's a roll and a yaw at the same time, and taken to its extreme, it can result in the boat capsizing. So it's very important that you can maintain the heading of the boat predictably.
And the fifth and final key element is around efficiency. You want to elaborate a little bit more on that for us?
Sure. The number one consideration that a naval architect uses to predict the performance of a boat with a given amount of horsepower, say, is the weight, is the displacement of the boat. But there are other things besides the weight or the displacement of the boat that determine its efficiency. One is the hull design. I touched briefly earlier on the fact that a boat with a finer bow, sharper bow, going into the waves is going to slow down less than a boat with a big fat bow. The big boat with a big fat bow is gonna ride very hard, and it's gonna pound and be uncomfortable. It's also gonna be wet, so it's gonna reduce your visibility as the spray is always coming over the bow. A boat with a finer bow, not too fine, because then you can bury the bow going down sea, but the right amount of dead rise and the right amount of angle of entry, the boat will be much smoother going into the waves, but it'll also slow down less. And what that means is it'll burn less fuel. When you think about it, a big fat bow will slow way down. It's like hitting the brakes every time you hit a wave. Well, then it has to speed back up again. And while it's slowing down so dramatically, you're burning a lot more fuel. You might burn almost twice as much fuel actually in a heavy sea with a big fat bow, whereas you might only burn 20 or 30% more with a better designed hull. So it definitely impacts the range of the boat as well as the safety and comfort.
And what's interesting is that's a factor that a lot of people probably don't consider, you know, when they're looking at a boat and they're looking at range, they're looking at the performance data that they can get online or get from the manufacturer, but you know, that data is often you know, collated in a flat, still environment. And so it's something that can often people can grossly, you know, underestimate things like range, you know, on boats that particularly that are built with a fatter bow.
Right, and speaking of those numbers that you see, every manufacturer is going to want their boat to look as good as possible. So it's not only calm water, which affects the speed of the boat, but also the amount of fuel that you burn, and it's usually in a fairly light load condition. They're usually not full of fuel and water, full of passengers. So once again, the weight directly determines the range and the efficiency of a planing hull. So take those values, you know, cautiously, consider them cautiously, because when you fill the boat up with passengers and fuel and the golden retriever and a case of beer and whatever else you can have on the boat, it's going to weigh a lot more and not go as fast and burn more fuel. It's just the reality of the nature of a planing hull.
And so that's it. They're the 5 key things as to why we think it's important to have a boat that runs well. So we hope that helps you next time you're out looking for your next boat.